You're in the supermarket, choosing between two bottles of washing liquid. One has a simple label listing what it does. The other has a leafy logo, earth tone packaging, and the words eco-friendly splashed across the front. Naturally, you grab the eco-friendly one. It feels like the responsible choice. But what if that label means nothing at all?
You will see that a number of products are labelling themselves as green or environmentally friendly. And it's useful then to pick up that product and see, can you work out what they mean by that? Because if you can't, then that is likely to be a form of greenwashing.
From the products in your pantry to your energy providers and even your investment portfolio, everyone is going green. But when a brand that claims to be sustainable can't back it up with hard evidence, it's called greenwashing. And lately, it's landing some of Australia's biggest brands in hot water. This is The Business Of, a podcast by the UNSW Business School, and I'm Dr Juliette Burke, Adjunct Professor in the School of Management and Governance. Dr Riona Moodley is a lawyer and lecturer in the Faculty of Law and Justice at UNSW. She has the insights you need to build a truly sustainable brand. Riona, what are the most common ways that brands greenwash?
Put very simply, greenwashing occurs when a business or a company misleads or falsely portrays their product, service, or even their business operation as being more environmentally friendly or sustainable than it really is. I suppose the most obvious example of that is where a company makes a false statement about what they are doing. So, for example, a company might say, we're investing in renewable energy, but they're actually not doing that. So that would be a very overt example of greenwashing. But there's a whole spectrum of other more nuanced forms of greenwashing, and that's really what we're seeing quite commonly across various industries. And so that includes making statements that are essentially half-truths. So it can include labeling your product as being green or environmentally friendly or carbon neutral, but not really explaining to consumers what is meant by that. And that can result in consumers misinterpreting what that signage or labeling means. We see in practice a lot of companies using terminology, so terms like green, carbon neutral, environmentally friendly. And to give you an example, so you might have a garbage bag that is branded as green, it might even be literally green, and a consumer who picks up that particular product in a supermarket will look at it and they might interpret the green signage to mean that it's biodegradable or that it's environmentally friendly. But what the manufacturer might actually mean is that it's made from recycled plastic. Now, those are two completely different interpretations, and it results from a lack of information being provided to the consumer.
I think I've done that. I think I've picked up dog poo bags that are green and they've got a symbol on them, and I'm just assuming that they are environmentally friendly. And now you're making me rethink that.
Yeah, and I would invite anyone to just go down a supermarket aisle and have a look at the signage and the labeling of products, and you will see that a number of products are labeling themselves as green or environmentally friendly. And it's useful then to pick up that product and see, can you work out what they mean by that? Because if you can't, then that is likely to be a form of greenwashing. It's not greenwashing when a company is able to clearly explain what they mean by the term.
Well, I think there is a company that got themselves into hot water, so to speak. I think there's been a few of them, but one of them really stands out is this one with Clorox. And they were fined $8 million for claiming that their Glad garbage bags were made using 50% ocean plastic. What happened there? Why is it such a landmark case?
It's a landmark case because what the ACCC were able to successfully argue was that although the company may have had great intentions of trying to make their garbage bag more environmentally friendly, the statement itself was found to be false. Rather than the product having been sourced from recycled ocean plastic, the company knew that the plastic was actually sourced from the shorelines of Indonesia. And some might ask, oh, well, what's the difference? Well, there is a difference because there is specific messaging that they're providing to consumers to entice them to buy their product by saying, look, we're helping our marine life by removing plastic from the ocean, when in actual fact, that's not the true story.
Is that splitting hairs?
Look, I think it's not splitting hairs because at the end of the day, under our consumer protection laws, companies are prohibited from making false statements and also from making statements that could potentially mislead consumers. And that's really important to preserve market integrity. And so if a company is going to say something quite specific, like we've derived our plastics from the ocean, and that's untrue, that is a false statement to a consumer who might rely on that in choosing them over another product.
I think there are other products that seem to be doing something similar. When we look at products that have eco labels because they want to help the environment, we've seen brands like Banana Boat and Hawaiian Tropic with their reef-friendly claims. And what was it about the reef-friendly that didn't quite work in those cases?
Yeah, so this is a case that's currently before the federal court, so no finding has been made. But the ACCC alleges that, and it's Edgeworth Personal Care, who are the manufacturers of these sunscreens, the ACCC alleged that the product itself is misleading because while it does not contain certain chemicals that are harmful to the marine environment and to reefs specifically, it contains other chemicals that still are potentially harmful to marine life. And so that's that disconnect between the messaging and, I suppose, what is being alleged or what might be the reality. But again, Edgeworth deny those allegations and it's still before the court. So we'll see what comes out of that. But I think, yeah, that case is quite an interesting example because it demonstrates the litigation risk that can sometimes arise if there's not clear messaging around a product.
This sounds like a minefield. On the one hand, you can see that an organisation has put their marketing campaign through to marketing and they've come up with something really simple and catchy like 50% ocean plastic or reef friendly. And to a degree, that's true. But to a degree, it's not. And it's on the not side that they're getting into legal trouble. How do you navigate that line?
It can appear to be challenging for businesses because in many ways they're trying to do the right thing, but there's a half-truth attached to what they're putting out to consumers. And they are reaping financial benefits from those half-truths. And so this is where I think companies and businesses do need to understand that there's still accountability that needs to be had as to what is actually provided to consumers. And we should also be mindful that withholding information can also be a form of misleading and deceptive conduct. So the long and the short of it for businesses is be truthful, be accurate, and have evidence to support the claims you're making.
Let's just say they're on the wrong side of that and they are subject to one of these claims. What's the impact for the business on getting it wrong?
Well, of course, it harms their consumer confidence in the brand. And we know that businesses spend significant amounts of money building up their brand. And so greenwashing litigation can take a big toll. And I think we've seen this with a number of brands, including Clorox and the Glad brand. They've changed their branding and marketing following that piece of litigation. And so I think there's been a positive impact from some of the greenwashing cases that have been run by the regulators because it's reshaping corporate behavior in a positive way, where consumers can now be a little bit more confident that they're getting correct information and accurate information.
And can you see it on share price? Is there a sort of one-to-one, you're in the public eye, in litigation, you've been found to have greenwashed, and you can feel it in your hip pocket immediately?
Oh, I definitely think there have been financial impacts to a number of companies. This is particularly so in the financial services industry. And so we've seen superannuation companies as well as investment firms targeted. And of course, that has had financial impacts on the company, the share price, but also the penalties that have been imposed in those successful greenwashing cases.
And so what have they been doing? Is it about where the superannuation fund has placed the fund? They've said that the money's going to a green account. We're not doing fossil fuels, for example. Is that what it's about?
Yes, exactly. Take, for example, the Mercer superannuation litigation that was successful, that was commenced by ASIC. Mercer had indicated to members and investors that they were going to not invest in particular industries, which included the fossil fuel industry, gambling, as well as the alcohol industries. They put out statements to that effect, and that was found to be false. So they were, in fact, and that particular fund was still investing in those industries. And as a result, the federal court found against them, and ASIC was successful in obtaining quite a high civil penalty. So I think it was in the order of about $11 million. So a clear financial impact, but did create a reset for the company.
So we see terms like eco-friendly, biodegradable, conscious packaging on lots of marketing campaigns. And I'm wondering, what kind of evidence does the company need to demonstrate that's legitimate?
The best way, and where companies have been successful in defending these claims, is to show and to demonstrate to the court that they had a reasonable basis for making that claim and that they have evidence to support their presentation of that particular claim or representation. And so long as they're able to demonstrate that to the court, they can potentially defend the claim successfully.
And do you think there are any grey areas when brands are thinking about marketing their sustainability, but it's not quite clear?
My advice to companies is, if you do have a product and you find that you're looking at the marketing of that product objectively, and some of the statements that you're making about those or that particular product is vague or too simple, could be open to misinterpretation, you should then have a bit of a rethink about how you're presenting that information to a consumer. And of course, if you're walking through the supermarket, you want to have easy signage to decide whether you're going to, invest in that product. This is where I think it's useful for companies to also, of course, they can't put all the information on the product, but they can say, if you would like to find out more information about this, please go to our website. And there are consumers who will want to check the website.
And I've heard about this term green hushing. What's that about?
So green hushing is the opposite of greenwashing, but it lands in the same place. Green hushing occurs where a business downplays their green credentials or fails to provide relevant information to consumers about their products in order to avoid scrutiny or greenwashing scrutiny. And ultimately, that is not good for business, and silence can also constitute misleading and deceptive conduct under our Australian consumer law. So if you've got information that is relevant to consumers, it is important that you put that information out there for them to make an informed choice about that particular product.
Is green hushing then this idea that you don't want to fly your flag too high? You've got something going on, but you don't want to be on the front foot.
Yeah, or you don't want to perhaps alert regulators so that they can start taking a look at whether or not the claims are in fact true and correct. I think it misunderstands the purpose behind ASIC as well as the ACCC, making greenwashing a key enforcement priority. If you have a product that is in fact doing what it says it's doing, there is very little risk that you are going to be fined for engaging in greenwashing. It simply comes down to, are the statements you are making true? And if they're true, do you have information to back it up? It's as simple as that. So I think businesses sometimes overcomplicate the risk around greenwashing, but if you keep it simple, accuracy, transparency, and evidence, you're going to be fine.
So thinking about now, there's this higher level of scrutiny, presumably following these cases around greenwashing. Has it changed the way that businesses now talk about their environmental goals?
I believe it really has. I think it's created a shift in how businesses are thinking about their governance structures and putting in place. I think there's a little bit more thought behind that. And in many ways, I think the regulators have played a really important role in that shift. As much as there's been a rise in greenwashing litigation, the cases that have been run have been strategic. And for the most part, ASIC as well as the ACCC have done quite a lot to educate businesses and to get them to get on the front foot when it comes to how they're marketing and representing their products or services. So I think that's been really useful for businesses.
And I think the ACCC has some guidelines around that, some principles.
Yeah, so they've actually got 8 guiding principles, which anyone can have a look at online. And ASIC also has their own guiding principles in relation to financial products. I've distilled those into, I suppose, 5 that I would say are the key principles. I mean, the first takeaway for business is keep it simple, accurate, and make truthful claims about your products. And secondly, have evidence, reliable, credible evidence to support those statements that you're putting out to the public. Of course, scientific reports are most credible, but you need to think about what is the basis for that particular statement. Third, avoid broad, vague claims. So the general guidance from the ACCC has been do not use terms such as green, eco-friendly, carbon neutral, unless you are prepared to explain to the consumer what it is you mean by that. So just going back to the previous example, green could mean compostable. Green could mean recycled plastic. Consumers will make different choices based on what that actually means in context. And the fourth is, I think, transparency is really key. It might seem tempting to businesses to downplay their ESG credentials to avoid scrutiny, but going back to Australian consumer law, it's very important that consumers have all relevant information available to them to make an informed choice. Silence or omitting information or giving half-truths can also amount to greenwashing. So finally, if businesses are going to make representations about future matters, and I think this is particularly relevant when we're looking at achieving net zero by 2030, businesses need to have a reasonable basis for those targets or future goals and aspirations. And that can include consulting with experts, engaging in financial modelling, and just building the case for any aspirations or targets that they seek to meet in the future.
So I'm just standing back here and thinking, as a small business owner, I've got a fashion label. I want to promote that it has low impact. What are the 3 bits of evidence I need to present back to the customer to say, and I'm justified in saying low impact?
The fashion industry is an interesting one because I think there are broader questions the industry needs to ask about sustainability in general, given that we know textiles are filling up landfill at the moment. But we are seeing more conscious brands making a concerted effort to completely restyle how they're producing clothing and manufacturing clothing and using biodegradable fibers, for example. There are other brands that are trying to engage in recycling of polyesters. I think we had Shein as one of them, as well as Zara. H&M has also been involved in that. And much will depend on how they market that information to the public. Because when it comes to recycled polyesters, yes, on the one hand, the company is doing something positive in terms of recycling, but at the same time, those recycled polyesters are also leaching a lot of microplastics, and they're also landing up in landfill. And so there are questions that need to be raised about how sustainable is this particular process.
So I accept that fashion has a lot to address, but if I am that fashion business owner and I want to say low impact, where do I start? What do I say?
I think it would be starting from getting down to basics. I think looking at what is your brand and what do you want to communicate to customers? Do you want to have a sustainable clothing line? And what does that mean? And so if we're thinking about an environmentally friendly clothing brand, then I think the business has to now think about what are innovative ways that I can now produce clothing that will be, in reality, sustainable and environmentally friendly, and then lead from there.
And so how do I prove that?
Well, it will involve some cost, but it will involve research and approaching experts to find out, well, how can I develop this clothing line in a way that is going to be, in fact, sustainable. So it's not simply enough to hope that your product is, you have to do the research. Because, of course, if it is sustainable, in fact, and you have research and evidence to support it, you will likely reap the benefits of it, because we know consumers are prepared to spend more on environmentally friendly products.
So you seem to think that consumers care about the environment, and I'm sure some do care about the environment, but I think I see a lot of people also buying from Shein and Temu, and I'm not sure that that's what they're putting out there.
Yeah, look, I think there is a mixed bag there. However, I would say that research, and there was a recent study undertaken by Monash University last year, has demonstrated that consumers are becoming more environmentally conscious in the context of their purchasing power. And so, notwithstanding the cost of living crisis, their research was able to show that consumers are prepared to spend more on environmentally friendly and sustainable products. So yes, while I think there are still consumers that are not considering that as a factor when purchasing products, we are seeing it as a trend. And this is why businesses are engaging in greenwashing. It's because there is a financial incentive there, and they're aware that consumers are prepared to pay more for environmentally friendly products.
And then as consumers, are we getting better at spotting when we're being misled about sustainability?
I'd like to think that we're becoming a bit better at it. Consumers do have a role to play here. I think we have the capacity to hold business to account for the statements they make. So I generally invite friends to do it as well. I say, well, next time you're going into the shopping centre and you're picking up a product and you're actually purchasing it because you think that it is environmentally friendly, have you looked at the packaging to see if there's further information to explain why it's environmentally friendly?
So, Riona, you've talked about the need for consumers to be more savvy, and you've also talked about the importance of businesses being accountable. Where does the balance lie?
Well, I think there's scope for both business and consumers to do better in terms of, so for businesses, of course, to be more transparent about the products and services that they're providing, and if they say that they're sustainable, to establish that that is true and correct. And at the same time, it's important for consumers themselves to play a role in holding business to account, but also to be accountable themselves. When we make informed choices that are better for the environment, that is better for everyone as well. So I think there's a balance that could be struck when both business and consumers are both playing that role, wanting to improve how we use products and services, businesses providing products that are more environmentally friendly and sustainable in reality, and consumers demanding that as well from those businesses and saying, well, actually, if you don't do this, because we care about the environment and we're mindful of the major impacts that are happening as a result of our consumption of goods and services, we want to take a proactive approach.
Where do you see the future going?
I think we're going to continue to see greenwashing litigation come through the courts and the regulators continuing to issue infringement notices. And I think in relation to some of the more egregious instances of greenwashing, yes, they will commence litigation. I do think that going forward, we will see more litigation tackling carbon offsets and net zero projections and plans. And that's just, I think, by virtue of a lot of the additional reporting that we now have in the space.
And a greater role for the consumer?
And a greater role for the consumer, hopefully. I mean, I think part of the reason why the ACCC as well as ASIC commence litigation, it's not just to educate business about what they should be doing, but to educate the broader public about accountability in this area and being a little bit more discerning and discriminating when assessing if they want to, for example, invest in a particular financial product that is making certain representations about their green credentials, or a product that claims to be sustainable or environmentally friendly.
That's Dr Riona Moodley from UNSW's Faculty of Law and Justice. She's also a researcher at the Institute of Climate Risk and Response. If you want to hear how one entrepreneur turned her frustration with greenwashing into a movement for change, listen to our episode with Lottie Dalziel, the founder of Banish.
I was trying to live more sustainably, and the first thing that I went to change was I was going to have a smoothie, and in that smoothie at home I was going to put it in a single-use plastic straw. So you can put two and two together and go, well, this I know isn't great for the planet. So I just did a simple Google search, which was best sustainable straw. Eventually I figured out that a stainless steel straw was going to be the right one for me, and then they arrived a couple of days later individually wrapped in plastic. So I thought, why not create a platform that teaches people how to live more sustainably, but also connects them with brands and businesses in Australia that are doing the right thing when it comes to sustainability.
You'll find the link in the episode description. The Business Of is brought to you by the University of New South Wales Business School, produced with Dead Set Studios.